It's 11 p.m., you're scrolling through old photos, and somehow your thumb stops on a face you haven't seen in years. You don't even like them anymore. You have a whole life now, a partner maybe, a completely different person staring back in the mirror. So why out of nowhere does your chest still tighten for someone you haven't spoken to since you were 19? You tell yourself it's stupid. You tell yourself you're over it. But some nights, out of absolutely nowhere, their name floats up from wherever your brain keeps its old files, and for one strange second, you're 17 again. Not because you want them back, not because your current life is missing something. It's because somewhere in your mind, there's a door that never fully closed. And today, I'm going to show you the strange, almost mechanical reason your brain refuses to shut that door, no matter how many years go by. Let's get started. To understand this, we first need to give it the right name. Psychologists don't call this still being in love. They call it the Zeigarnik Effect. Back in the 1920s, a psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik noticed something odd while sitting in a busy Vienna cafe. The waiters could perfectly recall complicated, unpaid orders down to the last detail, exactly who ordered what, exactly what was still owed. But the second a bill was paid, the order vanished from memory completely. Gone. Like it had never existed. Zeigarnik took that observation into the lab, ran her own experiments with interrupted tasks, and what she found reshaped how we understand memory forever. Unfinished tasks stick in the mind. Finished ones get filed away and forgotten almost instantly. Your brain, it turns out, is not built to remember what's resolved. It's built to remember what's still open. Now, hold that idea for a second and think about your first love. Not your longest relationship, not your healthiest one, your first one. In most cases, it didn't end with a calm conversation. It didn't end with closure or an apology or a clear explanation of what went wrong. It ended in silence, or a fight, or a slow fade neither of you fully controlled or understood. There was no final page. Just a story that got interrupted mid-sentence. And according to Zeigarnik, that's exactly the kind of story your brain can't stop quietly reopening again and again without your permission. Here's what's actually happening on a deeper level. Your brain runs something like a background filing system. When an experience gets a clear ending, a resolution, an explanation, it gets compressed, labeled, and archived away. It stops taking up active memory space and stops demanding your attention. But when an experience gets cut off before it resolves, your brain keeps a tiny process running quietly in the background, waiting for a closure that never arrives. Think of it like a browser tab you never closed. 99 tabs might be shut down completely, but that one keeps refreshing in the background, using up a little bit of memory, forever almost loading, never quite finishing. This is why the memory of a first love can hit so much harder than memories of people you dated for years afterward. It's not that the feelings were bigger, it's that the story was smaller. Fewer words were exchanged, fewer real conversations happened, fewer arguments ever got the chance to fully play out. And so your brain had almost nothing solid to actually work with. When there's not enough real information to build a complete picture, your brain does something a little dangerous. It fills in the blanks with fantasy. It builds a version of that person frozen perfectly in time, permanently 17, permanently soft focus, permanently free of every flaw a real, ongoing relationship eventually reveals with enough time. But why does this happen so specifically with a first love, and not just any unfinished relationship later in life? The answer isn't really about them at all. It's about you and who you were becoming in that exact window of time. Your first real romantic attachment usually happens during adolescence, right in the middle of what psychologists call identity formation, the period when your sense of self is still actively under construction. This is the exact stage when your brain is figuring out who you are, what you value, and what love is even supposed to feel like in the first place. A first love doesn't just get stored as a memory of a person, it gets fused directly into the emotional blueprint of your own identity. It becomes one of the reference points your brain quietly uses for the rest of your life to answer the question, what does being loved actually feel like? That's why thinking about them isn't really about missing a person at all. Most of the time, you're not longing for who they actually were. You're longing for who you were back then. The version of you that felt everything for the first time, before disappointment taught you to protect yourself, before real life added complications and comparisons and years of accumulated baggage. Nostalgia for a first love is very often just grief for your own younger, more unguarded self, the one who hadn't been hurt yet. There's actually a neurological reason this particular period of your life gets stored so vividly, and it isn't just poetic exaggeration. During adolescence, your brain is flooded with novelty, and novelty is one of the strongest triggers for deep, long term memory encoding. Everything about a first love was, by definition, happening for the first time. The first handhold, the first real fight, the first time someone chose you back. Your brain tags firsts as high priority information, worth holding onto in vivid, high resolution detail, the same way it remembers your first day at a new school far more clearly than the 400 ordinary days that came after it. So it isn't just that the story was unfinished, it's that the story was recorded at the highest possible resolution your brain is capable of, and then it got interrupted before the recording naturally finished playing. This combination is what makes first loves so uniquely sticky. A high resolution memory, frozen at the exact moment your identity was still forming and never given a proper ending. It's a perfect storm for your mind to keep replaying, whether you consciously want it to or not. Now, not everyone experiences this the same way, and figuring out which pattern you fall into is the real key to understanding your own mind here. In psychology, we can split this into two very different categories. The first is what we can call resolved nostalgia. This is a warm, occasional memory. It shows up sometimes, maybe triggered by a song, an old photo, a smell from a specific summer, and it brings a soft kind of fondness, not pain. You can think about that person for 30 seconds and then simply move on with your day without any residue. There's no ache attached to it, just a quiet, closed book kind of sweetness. Like remembering a good chapter in a book you already finished. This is completely healthy. It means your brain, over time, eventually built its own internal sense of closure, even without the other person's cooperation or involvement. The second is what we'll call the open loop pattern. This is different, and it's the one that quietly causes damage. This is when thinking about your first love comes with a genuine physical reaction, a tightening in the chest, a flicker of anxiety, an urge to check their social media, just to see, just to know what they're doing now. This isn't nostalgia anymore. This is your nervous system still treating the situation as unresolved business, still running that background tab, still waiting for an ending that is never actually going to arrive on its own. And here's the trap almost nobody sees coming. The open loop pattern doesn't just sit there quietly in the background forever. It actively distorts your present relationships, right now, today, because your brain is comparing real, ongoing love, which always includes boring days and mundane arguments and normal disappointments, against a memory that never had the chance to become boring or disappointing in the first place. You're not actually comparing two relationships. You're comparing a real relationship against a story that got frozen before real life ever had the opportunity to complicate it. Of course, the frozen version wins that comparison every single time. It never had to survive contact with reality, laundry, bills, or a bad week. It never had to sit through a boring Tuesday or an argument about something small and stupid, or the version of love that shows up after the initial excitement fades. That comparison isn't fair, and deep down, most people already sense it isn't fair, but the sensing doesn't stop it from happening automatically, quietly, underneath conscious awareness, every single time your mind reaches for that old file instead of staying present with what's actually in front of you right now. So how do you actually close a loop your own mind has kept open for years, sometimes without you even realizing it was still running? You can't force yourself to simply stop thinking about someone. Telling your brain to forget doesn't work, in the same way telling yourself not to think about a pink elephant never actually works. But there are two specific techniques that create real, lasting closure, even without the other person's cooperation, and even years after the fact. The first is called narrative completion. Since your brain is upset about an unfinished story, you give it an ending yourself, on paper, in your own words. Sit down and actually write out what happened from beginning to end. Not just the highlight reel of the good parts, the entire arc. How it started, how you changed because of it, how it eventually fell apart, and most importantly, how you're different now as a direct result of it. Give the story an actual final paragraph, in your own handwriting if you can. Your brain doesn't require the real person to provide that closure for you. It only requires a completed narrative, and it genuinely cannot tell the difference between an ending someone else gave you and an ending you carefully gave yourself. The second technique is called an updated encounter. This works especially well if you're tempted to check their social media late at night. Instead of scrolling in secret, deliberately look at who they actually are right now in full, not just one flattering photo pulled from a highlight reel. Their real, current, fairly ordinary life. Let yourself see that they've changed too, that they now have their own new flaws, their own new struggles, their own new complications, exactly like you do. This directly breaks the fantasy because a fantasy can only survive in the dark, protected from information. The moment you replace an old, frozen photograph with a real, current, unremarkable person living an unremarkable life, the spell weakens almost immediately, sometimes within seconds. There's a third technique worth adding here, and it's often the missing piece for people who've already tried the first two. It's called identity reclamation. Remember, we established that what you're often grieving isn't the person, it's the version of yourself that existed back then, the one who felt everything without armor. So instead of only writing the story of the relationship, write down what that younger version of you actually valued, what made them curious, what made them laugh before they'd learned to be guarded. Then ask yourself honestly which of those qualities are still allowed to exist in your life right now today without needing that specific person in the picture at all. Often you'll find that what you actually miss is a sense of openness or spontaneity you quietly packed away over the years, and that quality was never theirs to keep. It was always yours. You can take it back without needing to reopen any old conversation. When you put all of this together, there's a bigger truth sitting underneath it. Still thinking about your first love years later isn't a sign that you made some kind of mistake, and it isn't proof that some hidden part of you is still in love with them. It's proof that your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do all along. It holds on to what's unfinished, and it quietly protects the memory of who you were before the world got complicated. You're not broken for remembering. You're simply carrying an open file that's been waiting, patiently, for years, for you to finally write its last line. And the strange comfort in that is this. The ache was never really evidence of unfinished love. It was evidence of an unfinished sentence, sitting quietly in the back of your mind. And only you have the ability to finish writing it. So tonight, when that name floats up out of nowhere while you're lying in bed, you don't have to panic, and you don't have to pretend it didn't happen at all. You can simply recognize it for exactly what it is, a closing statement your mind never got to hear out loud, and decide, quietly, and on your own terms, to write it yourself. So tell me, when you think back to your first love, does it feel like resolved nostalgia, warm and closed, or does it still feel like an open loop, still a little unfinished after all this time? I'd genuinely love to hear which one you carry, so drop it in the comments below. If this video helped you finally understand a feeling you never had the words for, share it with someone who still checks a name they know they shouldn't. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any videos. Goodbye, and see you next time.